Well, joining us now is former Director of Counterterrorism at the United Nations, Howard Stoffer, Dimitri Diliani, as spokesperson for Fatah's Democratic Reformist faction, and we still have with us in studio military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lappin. So, Howard, I'm going to turn to you first. First of all, let's talk about the findings of this report. 8,119 deaths were verified in Gaza by the UN in the first 6 months of the war. That is a tragic number, but also a far cry from the claims of the Hamas-run health ministry that over 34,000 people were killed during that same time. So what is going on here?
I think what's happening here is that this is a propaganda war. This is a public relations war, and Hamas has been very effective in convincing the world that there are far more casualties among civilians than there should be, because the Israelis responded to the attack of October 7th when 1,500 Israelis were killed and 250 taken hostage. There's still hostages being kept in Gaza. Nobody mentions that in the United Nations. And what I find odd is that the United Nations is not focusing on other conflicts. What about in Ukraine? What about in Sudan, where tens of thousands of people are starving and tens of thousands of people are dying from the civil war there? So I find the UN is very uneven in being able to issue these reports. And I agree with Andrew Fox on many of the points that, this is not a war like World War II or even what's being fought in Ukraine. This is a guerrilla conflict, and you're trying to kill those who are coming up and, having guns and shooting at the IDF, trying to kill as many as possible. And also, we should remember that the purpose of this war from the Hamas side was to kill all the Jews of Israel. It was not to push anybody out of Gaza. There was nobody in Gaza that the Israelis had forces in. And so the purpose of their war was to be genocide on their part. And now they continue to fight, even though we know that eventually their forces are going to have to surrender. They're going to have to give up whatever hostages they have. This cannot continue. And it's Hamas, after their leader, Sinhar, Sinhar, had been killed.
Dimitri, I'd like to turn to you and kind of hear, your perspective on how Hamas goes about verifying who's a combatant and who's not, how they've been essentially rolling out these numbers, and how, of course, the report stands out in regards to what we're seeing from Hamas's reports.
Well, these are not Hamas's reports at all. And when the United Nations say that these are independently verified, they mean two independent sources. And why there are not too many independent sources in Gaza? Because Israel does not allow independent sources to go and verify. The health ministry have verified 44,000 people being dead. Now, people are still under the rubble after 1 year, more than 1 year of genocide. We expect the numbers and reasonably expect them to go up over 100,000 people. And also, when you want to minimize the numbers, let's also double check that the United Nations did not even verify the 7th of October's victims of 1,200 Israelis. So when you want to apply a standard, let's apply it across the board, even though nobody in their right mind would deny that what's going on in Gaza has been 13 months of genocide that were not created out of nothing, not out of thin air or vacuum. This is a genocide that is followed by a reaction to a military occupation and an escalating siege that has been going on since the early 90s in Gaza, with Gaza being a brink of disaster even before October 7th. And let's remember that before October 7th, Israel has killed 500 Palestinians, and there was no October 7th. There was no attack of Hamas. I'm not here to defend anybody. I'm not here to prove a point. If you want to talk to why October 7th happened, talk to Hamas, not me. I do not represent Hamas, but there's one thing that I am sure of. There is an ongoing genocide, and despicable media outlets like yours are trying to hide it with these fake people trying to spew lies.
No, actually, the reason that we're inviting you onto the show, just like we invited our other guest, is because we want to talk about the verification of these numbers. Hamas is 43,000. The UN says that they have 8,119 verified numbers. There could be many more people under the rubble. So I want to know what the process of verification is in doing this. Okay,
And
Yaakov,
people
listen,
on October 7th.
we didn't bring you on to attack the channel that's interviewing you and giving you a platform to speak. I'd like to turn to
And I'm
Yaakov to
not
kind of hear about the
listen to
verification
lies.
process in this.
I'm not here to listen to lies. Also,
I mean, again, we're talking about the process of verification. We're not talking about what's right and what's wrong here.
Intelligence
Okay,
in order
Yaakov.
for me to respect your platform.
Yeah.
It's simple as that.
So, look, this entire report is not serious. When we're talking about 8,000 verified casualties, that's highly misleading, because it's basically pretending to be a representative figure of the number of casualties in general in the Gaza Strip. These are the numbers that the UN claims it was able to verify. That's a very partial indication of the actual number of casualties. Now, nobody actually believes, in their right mind, to borrow a phrase here, that Hamas is going to be openly publishing the number of terrorists that it has lost. Nobody has any way of counting the number of dead terrorists except Hamas, and they're not sharing that information. Their interest, their obvious interest, is to present every casualty as a civilian. So presenting 8,000 casualties in the first 6 months of this war as somehow indicative of the actual casualty count is not serious. It's part of a propaganda effort against the state of Israel. Now, according to Israeli intelligence assessments, something like half of the casualties are combatants and half are civilians.
Right.
Every civilian casualty is a tragedy, and there's no question that the reason that those civilians are dead is because Hamas used them callously as human shields, because it knows that Israel is reluctant to go after Hamas terrorists when they're surrounded by civilians. The people who drew Gaza into war, the people who brought disaster on the Gaza Strip in a totally unprovoked manner in the pursuit of a jihadist genocidal ideology is Hamas. Israel did not choose this war, it did not choose the settings, and of course it would never fight this war if it didn't have to. So, I think that these kinds of reports don't serve the truth. We should acknowledge that we don't know the full casualty situation in the Gaza Strip. We should acknowledge that every civilian casualty is absolutely a tragedy. But to pretend that this number, the 70% number, is somehow indicative of the actual casualty picture in Gaza is simply not serious.
Now, Israel has said that it has killed a total of over 17,000 combatants since the start of the war against Hamas. They say that there's been a 1-to-1 combatant to civilian death ratio. So this would suggest that since the start of the war, a total of around 35,000 people were killed in Gaza, if we're taking the IDF's numbers as being valid, just as many outlets across the world will take the Hamas-run health ministry's numbers of now over 43,000 deaths as valid. So how is Hamas collecting these numbers? And again, how are these numbers being verified? How was the UN able to verify the numbers that it was able to verify up until this point? Howard, I'd like to hear your take.
Well, I think they're depending on numbers from the health ministry of Hamas. They're also depending on reports coming out of other countries in the region. But the truth is, these charges of genocide are not valid for many reasons. If the Israelis really wanted to, they wouldn't have been providing, as the United States has been asking, for 250 trucks every single day. The Prime Minister has promised to move that to 350 trucks. There are now 5 openings that have been operating to bring food into the area. The Jordan Air Corridor has now been restarted and reopened. The IDF is preparing for the winter and bringing in vaccines for the winter, bringing in clothing, repairing roads, building facilities. I mean, this is not what an army does if it's really out to destroy an entire civilian population. They are fighting there to stop the Hamas military from continuing this war against Israel and not having a repeat of it as it was after 2006. So these charges are all made up.
Dimitri, would you like to respond to what Howard just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is totally misleading, because at one point, slave owners used to say that doing well for the slaves. And when you say they are paving roads, they are actually dividing up Gaza into 3 parts with bombardments that followed up the Gaza Strip through paving these roads for military use. And when you say the discussions or the claims for genocide are substantial, we have to remember the ICJ, Human Rights Watch, almost every human rights organization called this a genocide. You cannot come up here and say just simply it's not a genocide. You remind me of a rhetoric that only comes out of supremacist genocidal ideologues, which you really represent now, trying to cover up for humanitarian catastrophe that you have caused. And when you talk about 250 trucks a day, before that, when the Israeli army, occupation army, used to calculate the calories for each resident of Gaza, as they boasted all the time, there were 500 trucks of aid coming into Gaza daily. And now with the genocide, with the forced displacement, with the ethnic cleansing, with almost 70% of homes being destroyed, with the civil infrastructures already obliterated, you're talking about 250. And that number is so inflated because you are not talking about averages. You're talking about some days where 250 trucks went in, but most of the days, zero comes in. That's why the World Food Program spoke of starvation as a weapon used by Israel, which is another genocidal charge to be added to the long list of genocidal charges against the state of Israel. What I'm saying is, you got to wake up and smell the coffee and stop living in this cloud that you know deep down inside nothing in the world justifies the killing of almost 18 or 19,000 children. And speaking, I mean, your researcher person that claims to be a researcher that you just interviewed before, claiming that these are fighters, 5, 4, 3, 2-year-olds are fighters. This is so dehumanizing that reflects the hate, racism, supremacy that is in the mind of every self-proclaimed Zionist today. Everybody that is a genocide denier is no different than any war criminal on the ground killing children today in Gaza. Wake up and smell the coffee, people.
All right, Yaakov, we're going to let you close out this conversation because we're going to have to move on to our next story right now.
All right. Well, look, this kind of crazy rhetoric is unfortunately all too common, and we hear it, all over the West. This is nothing but really just running interference for Hamas, for its war, for its cynical use of Gazan civilians. The fact of the matter is every major Western military knows that the IDF goes further than any other military in the world to try and protect civilians, even as Hamas uses them as human shields. Right now in Jabalia, I can tell you, in northern Gaza, that Hamas terrorists are not letting their own families leave their house. They're not letting their families, even though they know that that will likely lead to their deaths. This is who we're dealing with, and this is what the likes of the previous guest is trying to cover up. And we here have to be very clear about the truth. We are fighting an evil jihadist force who is bringing terror not only upon the people of Israel, but also upon the people of Gaza.
All right. Well, I mean, I think we're unable to kind of get a clear understanding of how these numbers are verified and the independent, organizations that are verifying these numbers. Again, obviously, that was kind of the conversation that we were trying to have here. We went onto a different path here, but I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us.